Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reimagine 2020, the virtual blockchain conference series. I'm your co-host, Ashlie Meredith, head of education over at MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator. And today we're bringing you version 7.0, the history of coins. And I'm excited to be joined by Edgar Fernandez. He's the founder of EOS Costa Rica. Hi, Edgar. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having us on, Ashlie. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So before we really dive into everything that EOS Costa Rica is doing, why don't you just tell us about your background? As you know, I'm the head of education at MouseBelt. We have a university program, 100 different universities all over the world who have interacted with us. And I know that you're really passionate about education and training developers, especially for EOS. So maybe you could speak to, how did you get into blockchain? And do you have any advice for students who might be interested in joining this industry?
Sure. Well, my background is in finance and accounting, and I spent 13 years in different investment banks in New York City. So I'm definitely in a traditional finance background. And my experience with blockchain was definitely a family affair. My co-founder is my brother, and our chairman and kind of the head of R&D is our father, who started us all in this journey. So I would say that some advice for students: there's no wrong path. Whether that's a career path, whether that's an academic path, or a family path. I think there are so many different areas around blockchain and sectors to concentrate on that whether you're a finance major, a philosophy major, there's definitely room for you in this sector.
Yeah, I always try to encourage students to add blockchain as kind of a domain expertise. Like no matter what their major is, find what they're good at and then apply it to blockchain, because that's just going to give them a competitive edge in whatever the industry they're in, right? We're going to need crypto lawyers. We're going to need media people. We especially need, people who can communicate the value and import of these technologies to drive adoption. So that's great advice. So interesting that you work with all of your family. I just got off another interview with someone whose father was, in the .com boom, always kind of ahead of the game, gave him a computer very young, and they run a podcast and events company together. So it was your father who got you interested in Bitcoin blockchain?
Yeah, he's always been into new technologies. He started the first BBS in 1987 here in Costa Rica, which was kind of the beginning of the internet, peer-to-peer systems. He's always been a passion around decentralized networks, either ham radios through the beginning of the internet, through the 90s. Always had a computer in our house, and he's the one that's really kind of pushed us into this realm. But we've always had technology in our household, and especially ones that allow for individual freedom. So blockchain has always been kind of top of mind since Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper in our household.
Yeah, and it sounds like he's always looking for the next solution, right, to some of these problems that we might have with internet connectivity, payments. So tell me how you guys started to look into Bitcoin as a solution to some of the problems that you had with business in Costa Rica.
Sure. Our legacy business was a internet infrastructure business where we have servers in a data center here. We provide web hosting, co-location, and dedicated servers for clients all over the world. And during probably the last 2 decades, we've been concentrating on that business. And it's native to the internet. And we were looking for a payment system that was also native to the internet. We had a lot of problems with fraud around credit card payments, speed and cost around bank wires. Using MoneyGram or Western Union wasn't feasible as either. So we were always looking for a more efficient native means of payment on the internet. And that's how we discovered Bitcoin around 2013, 2014. And really that set off the investigation behind the technology and blockchain, and how we can view blockchains as clients themselves, blockchain networks as clients themselves, and how we can support different networks with our infrastructure as a business sector. So that was the beginning. We became the first company in Costa Rica to accept Bitcoin, the first to also run a full node that we know of. And since then, we've been investigating different protocols that leads to what we do today with EOS.io.
Yeah, well, that's the power and promise of Bitcoin and blockchain, right? Is this borderless payments and really solving these problems of fraud and money wires. So seems like a natural direction to go, especially for a team so kind of plugged into innovation on the internet. And now you have invested a lot of time and resources into a specific protocol, EOS. For people who are just tuning in who may not be familiar, can you kind of walk us through that decision, how you discovered different protocols, what the benefits and drawbacks are, and why you like EOS so much?
Right. Well, like I mentioned, we started with Bitcoin and running nodes, validator nodes of Bitcoin. Then we started investigating into proof of stake consensus mechanisms. So we started running nodes for Dash, which is another proof of stake cryptocurrency, looking at any blockchain that would really pay us, reward us to run infrastructure. So we started investigating with Storage, SIA, Gridcoin, all of the first kind of generation of blockchain protocols and cryptocurrencies. We view Bitcoin as that first generation, Ethereum as that second generation, where you start to build smart contracts on a distributed and decentralized ledger. And then the third generation was what we consider as EOS.io, where you start to have more scalability. You use delegated proof of stake and some other functions and capacities that we feel are necessary for real world use cases. And we had, in that investigation, had met and followed Dan Larimer, which also started BitShares, and Steam. We were a Steam witness for a while. We'd run nodes for BitShares as well. So we knew that Dan Larimer was a doer in that sense. And when EOS.io came out, we found that a lot of the benefits around using delegated proof of stake, especially in open source, allowed it to be very flexible to not only a public mainnet like EOS public mainnet and some of the use cases around that, but also for different types of governance structures, whether that's private and enterprise use cases or public permissioned like other regional chains that we're currently working on with EOS.io. So that was a natural progression, kind of starting in proof of work with Bitcoin, moving into proof of stake, and then delegated proof of stake consensus mechanisms that lead us to EOS.io, which we believe today is the best protocol, open source protocol to use because it's the most flexible. And we've used it from things like payments. We've built decentralized exchanges using it. We've used it in accounting and finance in the enterprise sector. We've used it in logistics. We've used it in traceability of health and pharmaceuticals. And we've also used it in social impact with incentivizing blood donations. So it's really a huge different spectrum of use cases. And I think that speaks to the flexibility of the underlying protocol.
Absolutely. And I think it just fits so well with our theme of history of coins to talk about, this first generation of Bitcoin, which I think is widely becoming to be considered best used as a store of value, right? The transactions take a long time. It's best as like digital gold, or the first thing that we kind of figured out the problem of the double spend with Satoshi's white paper coming out in 2008, first generation of this kind of Web 3.0. And now we're seeing with Ethereum, okay, there's a lot more you can do, but we're starting to see a lot of congestion on the network, exorbitant gas fees. So with this third generation of different consensus mechanisms, you can have a lot more flexibility, a lot more real world use cases, which is going to drive adoption, right? I asked you before the interview started, what applications do you even have on your cell phone? Like, what is the everyday person using blockchain for? They're not using Bitcoin to buy their coffees, or if they are, it's not really the best thing to do with it. So Can you tell us some more of the exciting use cases, some of your favorites that are on the EOS network?
Sure. The one I've been using a lot lately is, as I mentioned, is called Upland. It's a property trading game that saves the properties as NFTs on the EOS blockchain, and allows you to trade between players in close to real time with no transaction fees. And there's use cases, for everything. Bitcoin is great for, as you mentioned, store of value and maybe moving large amounts of money in record time. I mean, if you want to, move a case of gold, right? Bitcoin would be a great use case. Well, that's the comparison, right? If you want to buy a cup of coffee or something that's low, well, maybe the means of exchange is not the best use case. Ethereum might be great for decentralized finance contracts because it's got a lot of locked value. So there's a lot of security around that. You might have a larger confidence around using a smart contract than Ethereum. But it might not be good for a social media application, right? If every like and every post costs gas to do that, if you're using it as a chat, and every message or every emoji sent costs you gas, that's not a great user experience. If you're using it for gaming, that needs to be quick and the latency needs to be low. You might look at other protocols, and that's where EOS.io kind of has brought in this idea of a general purpose blockchain. And there's many others that have followed with that same value proposition. So, like I mentioned, I use it for a property trading game, but we've used it for things like blood donation incentivizing, where if you don't have to pay for transaction fees, you're not disincentivizing certain actions. I've also used it for social media. Clearly, if we look back at the beginning of the internet, right, and I told you that every time you had to go to a website, you had to pay, right? That's not going to be a good user experience. And we've come up with the idea of, well, if I want to own a domain, right, then I have to pay for it, right? So I have to own some sort of property on the internet, and then users can come in and out, right? If I have too many users, I have to have more resources to supply those. But the transactions, the interactions with the user is always free. And that's the kind of analogy I like to use with EOS.io as well. It's like I'm buying an amount of resources based on the amount of usage I feel I'm going to get. And I'm going to allow free usage for those users because I don't feel like I need to charge every time they come in. And for us, it's allowed us to build things for enterprise, build things for, like I mentioned, logistics, container traceability. We're looking at things in pharmaceuticals and also gaming, right? I mean, EOS.io is used in a lot of different gaming applications. Wax is one of the largest digital collectibles marketplace that uses EOS.io. So and I'm excited to see what other use cases pop up, right? For right now, we think it's the most flexible and the most general, but we'll see what new use cases will pop up soon.
Yeah, could you explain that a little bit more for especially some of our newcomers tuning in, just how exactly the EOS protocol works for keeping the transactions free for users, but just as the internet works, paying for a domain. And this is like the transactions fees on the network, right?
Yeah, and one, the blocks are shorter, so the speed is quicker. One, use delegated proof of stake, so you have less nodes that need to sync at the same time. But to put it in terms that I understand, and I think is maybe quicker to understand or to grasp for some of the audience members, is let's think of a toll road, right? Of a toll road on a highway. You invest in that highway, and every time you pass your car, you need to pay a toll. There's a transaction fee for using that highway. What if you purchased part of that highway to use that amount of resources or that amount of space a certain amount of times a day? So every time I pass through that toll road, I don't necessarily have to pay because I've already paid to, have one small car pass by as many times as I want per day. If I have a semi truck, I'm going to have to purchase more of that highway, more of those resources, and I own that. They're not combustible. You don't spend it every time you go. You kind of own it for the amount of resources you need. So if I have enough for one car, I can use it and go through. The transactions are free as many times as I can, as long as in that highway there's space for the amount that I've purchased. But if I need to then use an SUV or a larger truck or a semi, I would have to then purchase more of that highway in order to use it. But I'm free to transact, I'm free to move in and have a better user experience. Currently, Ethereum and other proof of work mechanisms that have gas or transaction fees, you pay every time you go through, right? And that's a block or just a blocker to adoption, right? It's just an inconvenience to the user, similar to what I just mentioned as an example, like going to a website and having to pay every time you want to go. It might be cents, it might be fractions of a cent, but you still have to have it in your wallet and you still have to pay every time you go. So we're trying to avoid that. And we think that EOS.io does that in a very elegant manner.
Does that present any challenges for someone who might want to build an application if they have a ton of user growth in a short amount of time?
Yeah, I think it does present some benefits and challenges, maybe changing the paradigm of how we think, right? Because if we have a lot of users, the users are going to be paying for those transactions, right? So, for example, Uniswap, the largest DEX in the world actually right now in terms of volume and the largest on Ethereum, you have to use gas every time you do a transaction on there, right? Uniswap and the developers don't really need to focus on that. It's based on the network and the use of the network, right? Using Ethereum. If I was going to build that on EOS, I would then have to calculate, well, how many users do I expect to have and how many resources do I have to provide? Because I can purchase resources for my users. They don't have to pay. So they can come and use my DEX without actually having to use gas fees. It's a investment of capital that might be tough for a startup, but it also scales with you. Because at first, if you're starting off and you don't have that many users, you're not going to need that many resources. Also, resources are much cheaper in the protocol. So as you scale, you'd have to not only have more users, more income in your revenue model, but also be able to scale with the more resources you would need. So it does present some challenges, but those are challenges that equal and maybe surpass in the benefits that they provide, which means you need a plan for what your resources look like. With any startup has to do anyways, right? It's a scalability problem with anything, right? Customer service, resources on the cloud, if you're doing that and hosting that on the cloud. So very, very similar in that manner.
Yeah, and I think the way you explained it, it's easy for people who have worked in other areas of the internet could understand. So let's talk more about exactly what you're doing with EOS Costa Rica and the different parts of your business. And I know you do a lot of stuff in education, which I'm really excited to hear about, similar to MouseBelt and MouseBelt University, and why that's a strategic business choice for you.
Right, yes. EOS Costa Rica started in 2018. It was a spinoff of the legacy business I mentioned earlier on from the hosting business. And we focus on three clear areas. One of them is providing infrastructure for EOS.io based blockchains. Two is developing enterprise-grade applications using EOS.io. So that means we have enterprise clients that we build on their behalf, or we build in-house software where we have the IP and we license it out. And thirdly, as you mentioned, we provide developer content in Spanish and in English for developers to learn how to develop on EOS.io, as well as webinars and content related to blockchain awareness and adoption in the region. And that is right up there with the other two business lines not as a social responsibility, even though we do believe that's important, but it's very strategic in our model. We think that we can only have a sustainable business in providing robust and secure, reliable infrastructure or enterprise-grade applications if we have the correct talent pool. And that's the biggest challenge, I think. I'm not too worried about finding new use cases for blockchain. I'm not too worried about finding new clients for blockchain. I'm worried about finding the developers needed to scale those in the manner that's needed. And so that's why we've concentrated and invested a lot on the educational portion. And that's key to our business and to the sustainability of our business. How are we doing that? Well, we've partnered with the largest tech university here in Costa Rica. We have an internship program where we allow the interns to work on open source software and try to develop. And one of the first things they work on is the guides and the developer principles and contribution guidelines that we use. So the first thing they do is actually work on the content that other developers behind them are going to use. So we find that becomes a virtuous cycle, right? And hopefully what we have is a new generation of interns coming in, becoming junior developers, mid-level developers, and senior developers, teaching the other generation coming through and improving the content of that program as we go through. And I think that's key to a sustainable business. And hopefully, if we do it right and we stay committed, we'll put Costa Rica on the map as a blockchain hub, especially for highly specialized software like blockchain.
Absolutely. So that's definitely our mission as well with MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator. We have a development shop that builds projects. We want to, link together talent, industry, and infrastructure. And we definitely see this as a long-term investment in the space, investing in education. We launched the Blockchain Education Alliance, which is some of the protocols and even layer 2 solutions in enterprise, such as banks and even beverage distribution companies that we've identified to be particularly interested in investing in education and research. So as someone also building out these kinds of programs, what would you say for any of these companies who might be tuning in right now? What would you say to them, like how to get started or what they should be doing or what they should be investing in order to ensure that they have a talented developer pool to create a sustainable business?
Yeah, I think that's key. I mean, in our experience, we've done everything from building a blockchain application for a top 5 global accounting firm to partnering with a multilateral bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, for their LACchain regional blockchain in Latin America, to doing JVs with enterprises, specifically in the logistics sector for the traceability of containers. So we've partnered with 3 different types of enterprise in these 3 examples. One of them is private in financial sector. The other one is a multilateral bank, which is very closely related to government and public-private partnerships. And the other one is more of a JV structure. And what we found in the 3 different examples and models I'm giving is it's always the innovation group. It's always the thought leaders in those organizations that are looking for a cultural change and that are really looking to bring startup culture into their largely established traditional culture. And it's a cross-pollination of knowledge sharing, right? Because we're trying to get all the knowledge sharing of their specific sector and the business logic, and they're trying to not only learn about blockchain and the tech stack we're using, but also the way that we build and why we build that way, agile methodologies and digital transformation, et cetera. And it's in that sort of cross-pollination that the common denominator is, one, it's always innovation-based, always groups that are willing to take risks and that know that, we're building POCs, we're building MVPs that are always looking to go to production, but we're learning constantly. both of our organizations are learning. And what we'll see is they'll bring junior analysts or members of their organization. We'll bring interns and junior members of our organization. And it's, since we're all starting at the same level in terms of learning, it's a very collaborative environment. And I think we encourage that. And if you're in a large organization or at a startup, there's always going to be a win-win situation where you can learn from both sides, and bringing and involving the most junior ones of your members in that exercise is extremely beneficial, I think, for both parties. So this constant learning and educational process is not just one that's for the most junior and the newest members of any organization. If anything, it's a holistic approach for everything we do, especially because there's so many rapid learnings that we have to do, and paradigm shifts that we have to do, especially in the development process. So I think you just need to incorporate it in everything you do.
Yeah, that's great advice, that it can only benefit them to include students more, include interns more, think about education, not just for goodwill for the community or as like a social responsibility, but also for their own team, educating themselves. And yeah, I definitely have that mindset. I always want to have an intern who is actively in school for the university program, because I just think it's so important to have fresh perspectives, and especially tap into the student perspective when you're building educational programs. So that's great. Yeah. And keeping in the theme with history of coins, so interesting that you were the first company to accept Bitcoin in Costa Rica, ran the first Bitcoin node in Costa Rica. Tell us more about Latin American and blockchain adoption in general, or things in Costa Rica. What were some of the big moments in crypto in Costa Rica? Where is it at now, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I think Costa Rica has an interesting story. You know, we've been part of it since the beginning, but it's really a large community of innovators and takers here. There's always been a big push into technology in Costa Rica, probably since the 1990s, focusing on maybe starting with Intel building one of their biggest chip factories here. For a long time, Intel was exporting microchips from Costa Rica, and that began this sort of environment to bring tech companies and tech-focused careers to Costa Rica, and the universities followed suit. So there's always been a high, I would say, fertile ground for developers and tech and software here, and the blockchain community has been no different. And you know, it started kind of as a few companies and a few entrepreneurs, a few lawyers, a few you know, crypto-minded and tech-curious people. Then we formed an association, so the Blockchain Association, which now kind of unifies that whole voice, not only to policymakers, to regulators, but also to join alliances outside of Costa Rica, in Latin America and abroad. And it's really started this movement here, where Costa Rica has always been known to be one of the longest lasting democracies in Latin America, very politically stable, environmentally friendly, open elections, open data, and that's fertile ground as well for cryptocurrencies and for blockchain. In terms of regulation, it's been very hands-off. I think there's only been one communication from the central bank saying, hey, if you use blockchain or crypto assets based on blockchain, it's really done at your own risk. There's an interesting kind of law here that allows you to pay employees in species, which means you can pay in the commodity maybe that you're making. So if you're picking coffee, you can pay your employees in coffee if you'd like, partially. So that's kind of allowed companies to also pay employees in cryptocurrency if they're working on blockchain nodes, for example, or working on getting paid in cryptocurrency. You can use that as a payroll solution. So Costa Rica is sort of in this very well-positioned jurisdictional environment, but also geographically, we're between two large continents that allow you to build low latency nodes and infrastructure, which I think is going to be extremely important moving forward. And hopefully Costa Rica continues to grow with the help of companies like ourselves and communities like the Blockchain Association and others to really help build this, and not to see it as a threat to terms in terms of banks and regulation and governments, but really as an opportunity. And one of the coolest things I think we've seen, especially in this post-COVID kind of world, is that tech jobs and tech careers and blockchain specifically allow you to work from anywhere. And we look for students and interns and developers and collaborators that are not necessarily in the metropolitan area, and allows you to go to, let's say, universities that have satellite campuses outside of the large metropolitan area. And what you see is a flourishing of that community, because no longer do you need to leave your family to go to the city to get a job. You can do it there, and you can earn, high wages working from there, and then you end up spending it in that same community and improving the life, but also the opportunities that they have. So it's really wonderful to see that, and hopefully blockchain tech really makes that even easier. And if Costa Rica sees that as an opportunity, it's just a microcosm of what happens in the world, right? You don't have to go to New York, San Francisco, London, Sydney, and Toronto, or any other, Israel, for example. You can build great tech from anywhere where you are, and why not do it with great weather and great beaches and great rainforests down here. So hopefully this is an invitation to everybody to say, hey, come down to Costa Rica and try and build your career here. And hopefully we have an environment, a government, and a community that's welcome to that.
Definitely feeling a little jealous of Costa Rica weather here in Denver. I mean, most of the US, right? Having some of the worst storms ever. And I think this is the coldest weekend I've had since living in Denver last weekend. So definitely jealous of that. And I've seen the same thing too. And I try to tell people or companies in blockchain this all the time, is that the coastal regions in the US get a lot of attention already. There's San Francisco, LA, New York, MIT, UC Berkeley, as far as universities go. But we have touch points with universities all over the US and in other countries, and in the rural universities and the state schools, there's actually a lot of passionate students doing really great things, starting startups, doing conferences, and trying to encourage big players in the blockchain space to look more to the rural and state schools as well. And from what you're saying, hopefully encouraging some people to look into investing more into Costa Rica. So that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, shout out to Denver. I mean, it's become a blockchain hub in itself. Embracing this technology, University of Wyoming as well, the city of Detroit. All these different places have embraced this, and a community of developers that are building cool things in places that maybe don't get as much attention, but definitely should.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to wrap up, it's still kind of the new year, the beginning of the year. Bitcoin just broke 50K. Seems like there's a lot of good things coming for the future. Anything that you see coming down the pipeline for 2021, some predictions or just goals and things that you'll be achieving with EOS Costa Rica in the next year? What does 2020 look like to you, or 2021 look like to you?
Yeah. I think if we've been in the space for a while, these are cycles. Everything's positive, clearly. We try to keep our heads down and keep building and keep focusing on real world use cases more than chasing the new shiny thing. But there's a lot of shiny things out there to chase, and a lot of things to be excited about. And I've been called easily encouraged before, so I don't think that's a bad thing. But we are really excited for, I think, three things, or I'm very excited about three things. One, the emergence of regional blockchains, public permissioned regional blockchains. I think the answer of the BSN network in China, seeing that in Europe and Western Europe, and what we're seeing with the Inter-American Development Bank, with LATAM being a public permissioned infrastructure for public goods. It's like building a Pan American highway, right? It's supported by multilateral banks. It's financed by member states, really. And it's focused on building the infrastructure, so all the different use cases. It's sort of, coordinating to have the backbone of the internet be available to as many people as possible. In this case, having the backbone be a blockchain, and we're really excited to see that, especially develop in Latin America. There's some really cool use cases popping up, but you need to have that first layer, and that layer is the infrastructure. Second, decentralized ID, self-sovereign ID. I think that's really gonna pop up. It's another one of those really important building blocks to get to those use cases. It's really hard to have true ownership, digital ownership, right, if we don't have a good solution for decentralized ID, verified credentials, and self-sovereign ID, where it doesn't necessarily be the country you were born that gives you the ID that allows you to open a bank account or buy a home or apply to a university, right? It's a conjunction of all the verified credentials that you've built along your life. And that's really going to allow and empower the individual. We're really excited to see how blockchain allows for decentralized ID methods and self-sovereign ID. And lastly, I think one thing that I think is going to really be a game changer is NFTs and digital collectibles. I think we've seen what decentralized finance can do to the financial sector, but non-fungible tokens and digital scarcity, right? The idea of ownership and scarcity. Seeing what NBA Top Shot is doing. I don't know if you've checked it out, but owning highlights, right? We can own a piece of content, a unique piece of content that's provable, tradable, and also fun. I'm really excited to see what other pieces of content we can tokenize and own. And I think that's so cool. If I see a rookie with a cool highlight and I can buy it and own it and maybe sell it to Coke for a commercial later on in life, or just play it as many times as I want, as the same thing as I have a trophy case of a Little League baseball or something that's so tangible. And blockchain allows for that, right? That feeling of nostalgia and of unique and digital ownership is really going to be very cool to see. So I'm excited about that as well, in a little bit more of a fun way.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic right now. And during our last conference, we had a little NFT gallery. We had some NFTs that you could scan a QR code and buy in between some of our segments. So I hope that we get to do that again. Well, Edgar, if people want to find you, where can they find you, and who are you most hoping gets in touch?
Sure. We're EOS Costa Rica, eoscostarica.io. You can find us on all our large social networks as EOSCR on Telegram, EOS Costa Rica on Twitter. And hopefully anyone who wants to learn more about the blockchain ecosystem in Costa Rica is welcome to reach out to us, whether it's EOS.io based or not. We are agnostic in that sense. And hopefully people that want to build real world solutions, whether that's a large enterprise or a small startup, we want to partner and focus on helping you build that. And lastly, students out anywhere. I know we mentioned our intern program that's locally in Costa Rica, but we have partnered with other US-based universities and hopefully others outside of the US. But if you're a student and willing to work remote, or hopefully the world will allow us to do it in person, come down here to Costa Rica to work with us. We're open to international students and sponsoring that as well. So thank you so much, Ashlie, for the time and invitation. And hopefully we'll be invited back at the next series.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Edgar. That's Edgar Fernandez from EOS Costa Rica. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more of Reimagine 2020.